This is the most important time to own gold and silver. As God is my witness, I believe everyone needs to own it, and they need to own it and think of it as wealth. And if you look back and see talk to a guy like Rick Rule, who you know and I know, and
Hmm.
everything Rick has ever bought has been out of favor. Every
Hmm.
successful investment Rick has ever made. He's a legendary investor. He'll tell you all the money he ever made is when everyone was going the other way and he bought something undervalued. And he told me personally about a big investment he bought that he thought was the place to be, and it got halved. And instead of selling, he doubled down on it. Now that's not what I'm telling people to do, but he doubled down on it, and he will tell you it was the best investment he ever made in his life. And this is the kind of contrarian you have to be. And he often talks about, if you're not a contrarian, you're a victim. And that's what you will be when this is all said and done. And if you don't see that right now, where asset classes are so distorted, where interest rates are manipulated to all-time lows, where money creation, where over 50% of every dollar ever created in the history of this country has been done in the last 2 years, then you're not paying attention and you're thinking that the status quo will remain. And I think anyone who's wise in hedging their place in life would, even if that's how you believe, that we'll be okay and we'll pull ourselves out just like we always have. If you don't have a life raft before you hit the iceberg, you're dead in the water. And I really do think that people listening to this, I mean, I would hope anyone listening to Gold Silver Pros would own some gold and silver by now. But I just want everyone out there to know, as we look forward to 2022 and talking on a more regular basis, that from my perspective,
Hmm.
gold and silver are not an investment, period. They're wealth. And they may perform like an investment, but in a world where everything is blown out of proportion and completely and totally distorted, you need to have some gold and silver as the bedrock wealth, and look at it from that perspective, not in terms of investing, but in terms of preserving and maintaining your wealth in really kind of a world gone crazy. So we've seen through Silver Squeeze, as an example, an expansion into I don't even want to say into the mainstream, but a greater awakening by a larger segment of people into why they need to own precious metals. And so it's certainly growing the pool of people that are buying, and the amount of effort it takes to service those people. I don't think we've seen anything yet. There will be an event, a seminal moment where people wake up and look around them and say, my God, where do we put our money when things start to deteriorate or break apart? And if you can't see the value in precious metals, you're really not looking very hard. And I think that the people who have opened their eyes early are seeing that. In terms of allocation, we did more business in the first quarter this year than we did in many years past. So it's really insanity. Probably 95% of every order that we have done, I think was the last calculation about a month ago, was in silver or had silver in it. Gold should not be ignored, but I think silver is the value proposition of a generation, the value in silver. And it's really hard to ignore, not only from a supply side, but a demand side, a utility side, everything in silver, the diminishing availability of it in the ground. I mean, it's the buying opportunity, the value proposition of a generation. And I think people are those who are paying attention realize that there are very few things that offer the potential return and value and an asset that is under half of its 1980 peak that silver does. And that in and of itself has been the hardest thing for us, to continue to get copious amounts of silver in the door. I would like to say that ultimately I do believe gold will be the place to be. And you and I have talked about, and no one's done a better job at talking about the Basel III classification of gold and how it plays out. I think when you see the massive accumulation by the central banks of gold, by the commercial banks, by one trader on the COMEX right now who holds 4,000 ounces or 40,000 COMEX contracts, 4 million ounces of gold. I think that the place to ultimately be is gold. However, the pathway into getting there is found in silver. And I think people are waking up to that. So massive expansion into a larger segment of the population. I wonder, one of the things I've always liked about talking to you, Rob, and calling you when I have questions, which I have, is the things that you talk about are rooted in logic. And I cannot argue with anything that you're saying, but in the back of my mind, I wonder, how high can interest rates go? I mean, you have the perfect storm brewing, that's for darn sure, when you realize that stocks, bonds, and real estate are all at all-time highs. When you talk about what keeps people sane nowadays in the midst of all of this insanity, is the fact that their housing prices, their home prices have never been higher, that their 401ks have never been higher. Certainly that's important. If interest rates rise, what does that do to the housing market? Well, it kneecaps it. What does it do to the bond market? It crushes it. That all pulls down the stock market. Is it the perfect storm waiting to happen? My question is, or my thought is, can they really let interest rates rise? When we talk about inflation, it was Paul Volcker who raised interest rates to 20% nearly in 1980. And that stopped inflation in its tracks and killed the gold bull market. But you try to raise inflation or interest rates rather, much past 3%, like they tried in 2019, and the whole system went into convulsions. What happens? I will say this, though, that this is the problem, like in Austrian economics, the crack up boom, where the misallocation of capital and resources creates this environment where people's housing, their homes have doubled in value in a year. It's not sustainable. And so what happens when the price starts coming down? I think it's a religious experience for an awful lot of people, especially those who bought late in the cycle. But I wonder at what point do they give in to the reality that if they let interest rates rise too much, that the whole system busts apart. And so I follow your logic, but I keep hitting a wall in my mind. Like there's just no way they can really raise rates. Is it token? Is it lip service? Are they just trying to appease the market by saying we are going to fight inflation? Because just about everything they say they're going to do, they don't do, and or they say is going to happen doesn't happen because inflation is getting out of control. But when you think about it, who's benefited from the inflation? The wealthy. Their asset prices have gone sky high. And the poor are getting poorer. They can't even put food on the table or drive to work and back without it being one day's wages. So rising interest rates completely collapses the system. Now, I guess where I find a pathway to your logic is there an event? Could it be Saudi Arabia announcing now that they're have a relationship, a military relationship with Russia, the way Nigeria does as well?